Hi, I'm Arthur, and it has become pretty apparent that an anomaly has appeared. A pilot error, if you will, and a non-40k video has become pretty popular on my channel. So, to give myself some more time to read and also to vary up my content a bit, I'm gonna do a little bit of an aside here and try some more Trench Crusade stuff. So that, one, I can get more people interested in the game, and two, because I have been kind of just low-key obsessing over it ever since I got into it a couple months back. I'm not really active in the community outside of my own little friend group that I'm teaching how to play, but it's really damn fun to play, and I've been kind of messing around with stuff. If this video does well, who knows, I might make an entire series discussing every single faction in the game that you can play right now, and then maybe do some big scary video at the end. So with all that being said, I have a question for you. Given the choice of right or wrong, good, bad, you didn't just choose to be the bad guy. You chose to be evil, the lowest of the low. You knew that you were not doing anything good, but you knew that if you followed through with the path you chose, you would be rewarded. What if your boss, the person you report to, was the embodiment of all that was evil in the world, and you willingly bent the knee to them? Well, my friend, then you would likely fit in with the Heretic legions. One of the biggest differences in Trench Crusade as a universe as opposed to 40k is that there is, in fact, actual distinguishable villains, not just antagonists, but villains. I mean, you cannot argue this. These guys are literally fighting for the devil, and they are committing horrible acts of violence and every other crime known to man. For your standard heretic trooper, a desiccated and cursed fetus is standard for their kit, so that should tell you just how evil the basic guy truly is. So I want to talk about them, their lore and their playstyle, and also a few extended pieces for Hell that I think fit mostly with them. So sit back, relax, draw a few pentagrams, drop the symbol of Lucifer on the ground, and let's pop into the lowest of the low. If you didn't watch my original video, which is what is Trench Crusade, let's cover the basics once again so you know where they started. In the first crusade to retake Jerusalem, some of the Knights Templar, which you in the comments were quick to correct me, were in fact the Knights Templar. Thanks, by the way. I actually enjoy when people tell me when I get something wrong. Ended up finding an ancient artifact that corrupted them to the forces of the devil. They then proceeded to turn Jerusalem into a portal to hell, and thus the war began proper. Hellish entities began to spew out from this portal and attack the world around them. Scratching and clawing, these were the first of Hell's minions, though these weren't demons. See, there is this binding vow that Hell must abide by. The decree states that no true demon born in Hell can truly ever leave to wage war on mortal soil. Hell tends to circumvent this in as many ways as humanly possible, by corrupting people into their legions, or by sending out monsters that aren't really demons by percentage, but they do have a little bit of demon in them. See, as long as the creature isn't 100% demon, it's perfectly fine. It's a bit of a loophole, but it works right. The legions themselves are made up by the third of humanity that has bowed to the throne of Satan and threw their lot in with the forces of Hell. And the thing to note here is that the process of becoming a member of the armies of Hell is actually a lot more difficult than you'd expect. This is kind of represented in game, but in order to become a basic member of the Heretic legions, you need to make a pilgrimage to the gates of Hell, which might seem mundane, but the gates of Hell don't just blast you at their arrival. Apparently, you can die just kilometers away from the gate itself if the gates deem you unworthy. What determines if you are worthy or not? If you're a horrible person, I'm not kidding. If you go to the gates of Hell and you're just kind of a mean guy, but like neutral on the inside, are you just a normal person? Then the gates will fry your soul and body, not killing you per se, but just leaving you a burnt corpse sitting on the roadside miles out from the gate itself, looking like the Mexican alien until Judgment Day. But if you are evil enough and deemed worthy to stand in front of the gates themselves, you are allowed to become a true heretic trooper, and are also damned for eternity. Like, this is literally a no turning back kind of thing. You are given your armor, your dead baby, your choice of weapons, and are sent to join a warband of some sort. These are the heretic troopers and legionaries, and they are the most commonly recognized of all the servants of Hell. They are more or less the standard grunt on the battlefield. They are actually a bit hardier, having seen the gates of Hell and been damned, their souls forever scorched. It does change them psychologically and a little bit physically. But this does kind of come as a trade-off. See, the standard stock of humans that work for the Heretic Legions, it is implied, but I could be proven wrong later, are a little bit hardier than your average human, and they do have more magic mumbo-jumbo bullshit at their disposal. This is at a trade-off of the fact that there are just less of them just because they're not going to accept everybody. They just burn everybody at the stake if they could. Meanwhile, for the forces of New Antioch and the Trench Pilgrims, they will take quite literally anybody they can get. Now, this does balance out later with the higher-end soldiers that the Heretic Legions have and the low-end soldiers like the Wretched, but we'll cover them as we go through this because I'm going to try and hit every single available unit right now. So this sort of binding ritual does leave them with brands on their skin depending on what demon lord has accepted them into their folds. But what if you want to take it further? What if you want to enter the gates of hell? Well, there's a good chance you'll just die. Burned to a crisp, damned to hell, that kind of thing, torn apart by the sinner's souls. But what if you're so horrible? What if you are genuinely such an irredeemable piece of shit human that you actually can just walk into hell and they're like, oh yeah, welcome, you fit in? Well, then your body becomes scorched by the fires of hell, but you don't die. You grow stronger, blessed, and covered in even more markings of hell. You become larger and stronger. The armories of hell permanently fuse metal armor to your body, this Gehenna plate that is incredibly resilient to damage. You yourself become a hulking monster of a person, able to wield most normal weapons that normal men couldn't even lift. You then become what is referred to as an anointed, and these are the worst of the worst. Outside of true demons, anointed are considered literal monsters of men. War crimes for them are kind of a goal. In fact, their goal pretty much in any war sense is to create new war crimes. You know, just slam fire radioactive leukemia causing shotgun pellets into orphanages. Why the fuck not? Says the anointed carrying a juice box filled with the blood of puppies. They don't care about anything except for winning the fight, but they do have one point that they will always respect, and for some reason it's the right to single combat, which, okay, if you're getting in a one-on-one fight with an anointed, there is probably a few other things going on that you need to pay attention to, but you know, if it's your last-ditch effort, they will respect it. So you can die, you can become an anointed, but there's one other option if you do end up going to hell. If you lack the physical constitution to be considered a good fighter, you can... Okay, so I want this video to succeed, and I want you all to be able to see it. I don't want it to get censored by YouTube, and as a lot of YouTubers refer to it, we kind of have to play the game here, so I can't use a few specific words here, but I'm going to get as close as I possibly can. But to get into what I'm saying, anything that is seen as an affront to God, anything that is seen as any means something that God would frown upon is seen as something that the devil would smile towards. So, the Choristers. They commit a ritualistic act of self-harm so severe that it ends their own life. There is a literal ritual that goes alongside it. Basically, the more pain the Chorister can commit to their body before passing on, the more it will appease the forces of hell. The act of taking one's own life is seen as a mortal sin, so, with all that being said, upon their death, the devil looks at that and goes, that's pretty cool. If the ritual was seen as enough in the eyes of hell, and some greater demon or some lesser demon with a decent amount of power enjoyed this and saw it as a worthy sacrifice, they will resurrect this newly created Chorister, who will rise, fully remove their head, though they are kind of retconning that lore because any form of self-harm can actually create a Chorister, and a fountain of blood will jet out from the wound that ended their life. This fountain will start to form an ever-flowing symbol that represents the demon that chose them. They will then pick up their severed head and begin to sing a semi-prophetic hymn that talks about hell's victory over the forces of the Abrahamic religions. They are pretty gnarly, and to be completely honest, I don't know how I can show most of this without it being censored, but they're metal as hell. They are one of the most dangerous enemies to encounter on the battlefield of the Levant, because if a person hears this singing too much or gets too close, it can actually cause irrevocable madness. There are entire wards in like the medical areas for New Antioch that are just to restrain these individuals who talk about how the end is coming and they have to be chained to beds in order to just exist properly. I think the Choristers are very interesting, but the way that they are created does require a little bit of special speaking so that you don't, call down the dread god that is YouTube censorship. But regardless, let's move on to the next and less impressive individuals, the Wretched. These guys are probably in the shittiest situation imaginable for this setting, or at least one of them. Basically, Wretches are a classification of unfortunate who isn't exactly 100% willing to fight. So imagine you're trying to travel to a safer place. You do have to pass through Heretic lands in order to do so, but at some point during your border crossing, you get caught by a warband who was on patrol. Congrats! Your life is now going to take some pretty rocky turns. How rocky are we talking, you may ask? Well, for one, you're most likely just going to be sold for food, as cannibalism in the Heretic colonies is actually pretty common. Literally just meat markets for captured people. I'd assume Spiced Priest probably sells for a decent amount. You could also literally just be used as spell reagent components for the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, which I am told is probably a fate worse than death. But there is a way out. Hell, for what it is worth, has a lot of strict rules. And one of them is this binding law that if you serve Hell, you can earn your freedom. So, if you elect to fight for the Heretic Legions, you are branded with a flesh-eating tattoo. If you stray too far from the Heretic Warband itself, you'll just get dissolved. But if you serve the Legion well, and you eliminate one of God's soldiers, you are allowed to actually just leave without punishment. Hell, I don't even think they're allowed to capture you again, at least not immediately. The rule is represented in-game that if a wretch kills an enemy elite miniature, they have to be removed alongside the elite, and are basically removed from your entire warband afterwards, as they just fucked off due to earning their freedom, which is so goddamn cute and fluffy. Before I go into the weirder shit, I should mention the Heretic Priests, which weirdly enough are pretty simple, but they are the most important aspect of a Heretic Warband. You actually cannot run a Heretic Warband in-game without one. So, what are they? Literally just corrupted priests who made a deal with the devil and now channel the powers of some demon they met in prayer one day. Literally just priests who became heretics. It's exactly what it says on the tin. They have some pretty interesting powers involving the manipulation of minds. It's kind of weird, but they can puppet people on the tabletop too. It's pretty neat. Alright, with the normal people out of the way, let's get into the weird beasties. For a little context, most circles of hell have specific soldiers that represent them. These are usually specially trained entities that represent them on the stage of war that is the Levant. One of the most common ones you will see is likely going to be the Death Commando from the Circles of Wrath. These weird mutants are humans that were abducted, brought to Wrath, and taught how to murder in the quickest, easiest, and quietest way possible by the people who live in the Circle of Wrath, which, surprise, surprise, is populated by a lot of murderers. The Death Commandos are trained in the esoteric ways of murder, with their bodies modified and augmented in such a way to make them be able to adapt to pretty much any circumstance just to get the target of their assassination down. They learn to slide on their bellies like snakes. They learn how to be more quiet than any normal human being should. And eventually, the energies of hell warp them into these weird little gangly freaks. At the end of their training, they ritualistically remove their tongues and learn how to speak in sign language so that they never really can talk about the things that they saw when they were going through their training, because only the people that in that training know the sign language itself. They are equipped with stealth generators that cause them to be hidden not just from the sight of man, but also the sight of God. This stealth generator causes them to look like nothing more than a heat shimmer if they're standing completely still, and pretty much all miracles have difficulty finding them. If God is trying to exact divine retribution, Death Commandos are pretty hard to track down. They are usually equipped alongside that with things called Tartaros Claws. Though rules as written, you can actually equip them with any melee weapon, but the Tartaros Claws are kind of what the default is, and they're fucking dope. Basically metal finger knives that are dipped in the river Styx, making them more toxic than any regular human poison. Outside of maybe something that a Sultanate alchemist's poison, but like, you know, it is what it is. These guys are responsible for one of the worst days in Christian history for the setting, which was the assassination of the Supreme Pontiff, the High Priestess Aelia, and the Holy Roman Emperor, all in the same day, relatively at the same time. This led to quite the devastation to morale in the forces of New Antioch, but this doesn't make them overpowered. They bleed like everything else, they're just harder to hit. Speaking of bleeding, this right here is the Trench Werewolf. And yes, if you are the average soldier and you are fighting heretics, you saw this? You'd probably shit your pants too. This thing is horrifying and also incredibly practical. It is what is referred to as an artificial creature. What this means is that it basically was created using machinery and has no soul. It's pretty mindless on its own, but this feral fucking animal is set into places between trenches, no man's land, places that are littered with nothing but barbed wire and landmines. They have their bodies augmented to be able to withstand any kind of explosive, at least a few, and then also have all of the barbed wire they've run into get funneled towards their face, which if you couldn't tell is a chainsaw. So they cut through barbed wire. The purpose of this is to cut a path for other troopers to get behind them. They are also pretty damn horrible to deal with, if I'm being honest, but I didn't need to tell you that. Bro, they brought a werewolf to a gunfight. That is pretty fucked up. The next artificial unit I want to bring up is the Artillery Witch, which is probably one of the most fan-favorite designs in the setting. And for a goddamn reason, this shit is so cool, and it only gets cooler. Basically, these soulless, possibly automata things roam the battlefield and hover in place pretty much silently most times. Until they see an enemy, they then open up a small portal to the Foundries of Hell and pull out an Inferno Bomb, which is what that explosive is that they're carrying. They just rip this shit off, fresh off the fabricator, and then using telekinesis huck the fucking bomb at an enemy. They are literally living mortars, with the added intimidation factor of being a floating witch, and women are scary as a whole, so I mean, I'm already at a disadvantage here. Genuinely one of the most aesthetic designs in gaming. I do have two more guys that you are able to play with the Heretic Legions, but I kind of want to mention they technically are not Heretic Legions. These guys are from the Mercenary side rules, which is basically a bunch of guys that are shared in multiple factions and can be used in multiple factions. You just have to incorporate them in a different way. So these guys that I'm about to mention can be used in multiple factions, but I feel they fit more with the Heretic Legions than the other factions are allowed to be in. So starting off, the Goetic Warlock. These guys are metal as hell. They are essentially kidnapped holy men, priests, bishops, saints that are stripped of all flesh and meat from the fire of hell, but somehow kept alive through it, through magic, and are forced to feel what I'm assuming is basically just every single pain receptor on their body being fired at max capacity for months. The only way out? Sign a contract with hell to end your pain. Very Mortarian of you. Basically, the Goetic Warlock is given magical weapons, armor, and has their skeleton get carved with the Goetic runes that the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent uses to conduct magic rituals. This allows them to do some pretty foul magic. The main one is that they can now teleport for a reasonable distance in any direction, making any doors, locked, barricades, anything, being kind of pointless as they could just go right through it. They also have this kind of necrotic gaze. Due to the horrors they have experienced and felt in hell, their souls are basically scorched for life. Their stare can necrotize individuals, and fun fact, these dudes are usually found in the Circle of Greed, because all the greed demons, especially Mammon, really like stealing priests and shit. The last of the Heretic forces I want to discuss before we get into the more nitty-gritty of like gameplay and side warbands is the Sin Eaters. These big boys and girls are people who went to hell, and instead of becoming an anointed, they started eating other sinners in an attempt to consume the power of their sins. See, crimes against God and sinning is seen as a source of power in hell. So sin eaters, through proxy, try to consume them to gain more power. Now, you might think it's gluttony to eat them, but no, they're not trying to eat people because they want to eat people. Okay, they do want to eat people, they really enjoy it, though it's more greed for the power of the sin that they get through consumption. Makes sense? Okay, so it's based off of an old practice where they would hold like these weird offerings over a dead body, and a sin eater would be usually a homeless person who they'd trick into eating the sins of a deceased person. This is like a real life historical thing, by the way. So this person basically who ate all the sin bread was now essentially damned to hell because they ate all of the sin that was in the other person. That's kind of what this individual represents. Not so much I get the food because I want the food, more I get the power because I consume the sin. Though I will also say, Beelzebub, Lord of Gluttony, does kind of half claim them as his own outside of Mammon claiming them for greed, so they kind of share them on the weekends like any good couple that broke up would, but I'm getting kind of lost in the weeds here. But the Sin Eaters are pretty great for pretty much any legion. They have a lot of fun mechanics on the tabletop involving eating people and removing them from the board. It's nice. nice. With all of these little dudes explained, we have hit every single major dude that you can play in the Heretic Legions, outside of stuff that doesn't really have like models yet. Once there is an update, we will cover more if you tend to like this stuff, but let's get into something interesting. The variance between warbands, because there is a lot of alternate playstyles, and one of them is a little boring, but still kind of cool, and two of them are very cool, but the lore for these alternate playstyles is also very interesting, and I want to talk about it. So, if you want to stick around and hear about trench ghosts, sit back, because, gamer subs. How you doing, fellas? I know I talk about gamer subs a lot, but Papa's got juice to drink and bills to pay. Also, I'm gonna put you on some game. I've been really getting back into the old Call of Duties. I know that doesn't sound like anything that is germane to the topic at hand, but I've been playing pretty late with a lot of friends and mostly just playing Call of Duty Zombies, and I find the thing that keeps me focused and awake to get through these long-ass play sessions is actually just gamer subs. I've been chugging that shit, and it's been helping me actually be able to focus and get to those high rounds. Basically, I'm going through every single Call of Duty Zombies game that Treyarch made, and I'm having a great time doing so, but a lot of my friends can't meet till late, so gamer subs was kind of a way around that. And with lighter flavors, like anime girl thighs being, orange creamsicle, or something a little bit more tart, like Good or Brand Risk, I really have a lot of options. Regardless, if you want to stay up late and play video games like me, who has a totally responsible sleep schedule, then use my code BONEZONE at checkout for 10% off. And if you're more of a degenerate type than that of someone who would like energy drinks, then keep your eyes out, because in about 2 to 3 hours there's going to be a merch drop from Gamer Subs with their new waifu drop of Reverse Cowgirl. Comes with shaker cups, hoodies, and all sorts of other apparel that you can wear. This is a limited time drop, so I'm telling you guys a few hours in advance, so make sure you pick it up. And also, code BONEZONE will get you 10% off it as well. Make sure you tell them Mr. Bones sent you. I promise you they'll know who I am. Thanks once again to Gamer Subs for sponsoring this channel, and let's get back to the heresy. Okay, let's wrap up with the last of the stuff you need to know in order to play or even understand the faction that is the Heretic Legions. So, in Trench Crusade, if I haven't mentioned it before, there is sort of a format you need to adhere to for pretty much every single warband. Some miniatures are limited, and some weapons are more so depending on the faction, but they have relatively similar things across the board, bolt-action rifles and so on. The interesting thing about the Heretic Legions is that they have 3 alternative playstyles that you can do on top of the normal one. Most factions have multiples, I should note. I'm pretty sure they all have 3, but the 3 that the Heretic Legions have are actually pretty cool. They modify how you play the game. Each of them have an in-lore reason for existing, so let's go over which one is which, shall we? And starting off, we have what is likely the least interesting one of the 3 in my opinion, but is still one of my favorites of the entire game, and it is the Naval raiding parties. Basically, in the history of the setting, due to wartime needs, advancing technology at an incredibly breakneck pace, and also magic, the Heretic forces, much like the Germans in history, invented these kinds of U-boats that were a bit more evil as well as a bit better in quality. They couldn't fit any of their bulkier troops unless they were specially made for this. Pictured up there is one of the naval troops in their weird-ass cool pressurized armor. This was actually released relatively recently, and I think it's one of the coolest looking aesthetically armors of the entire game so far. These guys basically hold the responsibility of going from shore to shore and raiding for supplies, slaves, and anything else the Heretic warbands in question would need. These guys are such a menace that most people outside of this world Scotsmen refuse to live near the ocean, as the heretics may show up and just steal half of your village and torture the other half for funsies. The next variant warband is pretty fun and one of my favorite variants in the whole game. These are the Trench Ghosts, which, as of writing this, have gotten some official art, like yesterday. Basically, if you are a heretic trooper who sided with hell, but you die on consecrated holy ground, your spirits can't sink into the earth to go to hell, nor go to heaven because you're already damned, and thus you haunt the grounds you died in for all eternity, as a small militia of ghosts. They have a special model known as the Barbed Wire Banshee that takes the place of the Choristers instead of allowing you to play them. And when you play them, they actually lose the ability to sing their demonic hymns. They actually just scream this death howl that just insta-kills things that you look at, it's pretty fun. These armies are so fun, but some of their limitations is they can't take artificial monstrosities because they don't have souls. So things like the trench werewolves and the witches, they can't take those. But they make up for it by being immune to a lot of things that would affect normal corporeal individuals, like gas weapons, which, you know, they're ghosts, they don't have lungs, makes sense. It's such a cool idea, making trench ghosts, but it's definitely not my favorite. My favorite of all the variant warbands across the board right now, regardless of faction, no exception, is the Cult of Greed. The Chosen of Mammon, the Lord of Greed. These individuals are clad in golden armor and only worry about the best gear. The Cult of Mammon, if you run them on the tabletop, okay, first of all, you're based as fuck, but they have so many limitations, but so many benefits that make them so just different. So for one, the minimum cost for your soldiers cannot go below a certain number, and it's actually pretty damn high. Basically, you're doubling the cost of your average troop in order to field just one. Alongside that, you get so many weird benefits and miniatures that you can't even take. And I'll be honest, most of my hype for this faction is based off of the single image we have of the Cult of Mammon, which is this. And dude, it's just the fucking coolest. Their main symbol is that of the golden calf, and you get so many cute lore rules. Like, for one, if you play as Mammon's cult, you cannot use shrapnel or flame weapons, as he doesn't want you to hurt any of the stuff that you could potentially loot once the battle is over. So most of your flame weapons get replaced with toxic gas weapons. You gain magical abilities that revolve around the manipulation of greed, and a magical golden armor that is a special piece of equipment you can put on to certain miniatures in your warband that make you completely irresistible and magically cause people to become so greedy that if they're within a certain range of you, that they charge you for just a brief chance of being able to take the armor and wear it. Hammers that strike the runes of Mammon into enemies, and a cute little lore tidbit that because Mammon hates the current leader of the Circle of Wrath, he doesn't allow death commandos in his force, because that shit is cringe. But he does allow you to recruit Scoetic warlocks for a significantly cheap price, which is fucking awesome. And they can be in your starting warband, which is not standard for any of the other warbands. Their aesthetic is so fucking cool, and I adore them. I hope they get even more minis, and are even given their own unique faction priests, like just a giant gilded heretic priest in solid gold armor with a massive golden hammer, like the one in the picture, would be so fucking cool, but I'm just fanboying. So as to wrap this up, I kind of want to go over what you need to know if you want to play them, and what differentiates them. So it's a little bit hard to place because they're basically the new Antioch equivalent for the Heretic forces. They are very much in the middle of the pack when it comes to not having much of a specialty, but if you've played 40k, think the difference between Chaos Space Marines and Space Marines. They are basically the same thing, but they have a little bit more of a slight towards close range affairs, but it goes a little deeper than that. So one of the biggest things is that your basic guys are going to be slightly better than the average basic guy. Now, that is basically just because of blessings and boons you can give them, as well as random magic bullshit you can pull out your ass. But the big negative for them is that to counterbalance the fact that your anointed are pretty decent and your regular heretic legionaries, which is the upgraded version of the heretic troop, is that you can't take equipment that other factions would as easily. So what do I mean? So in most standard games, if you've played 40k, you understand that every single miniature has a cost in points. This is so that if you show up with an army that is roughly 1,000 points and your opponent does as well, you should theoretically be on similar terms. Now in this game, if you're playing a campaign, which is what it's built for, you play with 700 of these points, also known as ducats. But if you're playing a one-off game, you get 950, I believe, ducats and 12 glory points. In campaigns, glory points can only be earned by playing the game. Now, what are glory points used for? They're used for buying more expensive and more higher end gear. Now, for something like New Antioch, you use them to buy holy relics, anti-material rifles, really important shit that's actually like really hard to come by. The big negative for the Heretic Legions is you're going to be spending glory points on very basic guys. Like, you have to spend a glory point to use a submachine gun when that is a standard kit for the forces of New Antioch. Same with like an automatic rifle, which you can't pay ducats for, you have to spend glory points, which means you can't start with the best equipment or even just like the middle of the road equipment in this game. Now, there are some exceptions, like you do get shotguns for the same price, but it is kind of interesting to see that. Now, it does mean you have to work harder for your shit, and you have to protect the guys that get it in your campaigns, and if you're just playing one-off games, then I guess it doesn't really matter. But outside of that, another big difference is the gas grenades. Your guys get access to a lot of gas grenades, which is a very useful thing to have. The Death Commandos, it's one of the only ranged weapons that they can actually take, which is very useful, especially if you put a gas mask on them. Gas weapons can deal a lot of damage in a short period of time, which is kind of one of the reasons why they're a very useful tool. Regardless, that is just a rough summation of my experiences, and I've played a few games with locals, my roommate, and so on, just to kind of feel out how they are, and they seem to be pretty fun, pretty balanced. What do you all think about the Heretic Legions of Trench Crusade? They seem to be a fan-favorite faction, and I believe them. The Cult of Greed is so fucking cool, and I may actually make a warband of them yet, once I get my Scotsman warband done. Also, shout out to Westphalia Miniatures, who is doing a Trench Crusade campaign in order to promote new STLs and a new style of play with the Red Brigade, and I am so down to get those and turn them into an Alba force, which is the Scottish force for New Antioch. If I get to New Antioch because of this series, I'm going to talk about them because they're my favorite New Antioch faction, but I'm getting lost in the weeds here. So let me know what you guys think of me doing these kinds of everything you need to know videos about specific factions in Trench Crusade. I kind of like doing them, and it's a good breakup of pace, and I really enjoy the setting itself as well as the game. So let me know if you want to see more of this, and also what faction you want me to cover next. I'm very thankful that you guys support this content, and speaking of, special thanks to my channel members for supporting me especially well, as with your help I'm able to make this content and be assured that I won't go homeless within a week or two of the end of the month. You make my job worth doing, and I really do appreciate you all a lot. If you want to support this content, then become a channel member, because you get a bunch of silly little perks, and I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks once again for watching, and till next time, fun fact. There's actually a golden calf miniature in the game that you can use as a deployable piece of terrain in the fucking game. Because people are too obsessed with stealing it once it's deployed that if they get within a certain range, they actually cannot focus on anything else. It makes the area difficult terrain. This game is so fucking cool.